The evening had started like any normal day for the local vet who lived on the edge of a quiet farming town. People trusted him for everything, from sick goats to injured birds. He had spent most of his life studying the natural world, caring for creatures that could not speak for themselves. He was used to long days, late nights, and strange emergencies. But nothing in his life had prepared him for what was about to happen that night. The sky outside his clinic had been unusually dark. A storm was expected, but the clouds looked heavier than normal, almost like something was hiding behind them. The wind felt restless. Even the animals in the nearby farms were uneasy, making noises they didn't normally make at that hour. The vet noticed these things, but didn't think too deeply about them. Weather behaved strangely sometimes, and animals sensed it earlier than humans. That was normal. He had just finished checking on a young calf with a weak leg when he heard a low rumble, not from the sky, but from far across the fields. At first, he thought it might be a tractor or some farm machine, but the sound grew louder, sharper, and the air itself began to vibrate. The lights in his clinic flickered, and a tingling sensation ran across his skin. This wasn't a storm. This was something else. He stepped outside, wiping his hands on his coat. The field beyond his clinic stretched far into the darkness. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the sky lit up with a streak of glowing silver that cut across the clouds like a blade. It wasn't lightning. It didn't crack or disappear. It moved with purpose, with direction, almost like it was being controlled. He stood frozen, watching as the glowing object dropped lower and lower until it vanished behind a line of trees. A second later, a heavy thud shook the earth. The animals in nearby farms began to cry out again, louder this time. The vet felt fear for a brief moment, but curiosity overpowered it. Something had fallen. Something that did not belong to a normal night. His mind raced through possibilities. A drone, a plane, a meteor. But deep inside, he sensed it was none of these. He grabbed his flashlight, locked the clinic door behind him, and walked toward the field. The grass brushed against his legs as he moved carefully through the dark. The wind carried a strange metallic scent. The sound of crackling energy echoed faintly from the crash site. As he approached the trees, he noticed a glow pulsing between the branches. It reminded him of embers, but it was cooler in color, shifting between green and blue. He stopped for a moment, reminding himself that he was just a simple vet, not someone trained for dangerous situations. But something inside him kept pulling him forward. Maybe it was the need to help. Maybe it was the fear that someone or something was hurt. He took a slow breath and pushed through the trees. The sight in front of him was something he knew he would never forget. A strange vessel, unlike anything he had ever seen, lay half buried in the ground. It wasn't made of metal, he recognized. It wasn't broken in the way human machines broke. Its surface looked alive, like it was breathing through faint waves of light. It reminded him of a giant shell mixed with some kind of armor. He stared, trying to understand it. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it. He wanted to run back, but his feet refused. Then something moved near the base of the vessel. A tall silhouette rose slowly from the ground. He stepped back, almost tripping over a root. The figure was unlike any living creature he had encountered. Its body was covered in scaled plates that reflected the glowing light. It stood taller than him, strong but graceful, and although its appearance was reptile-like, there was intelligence in the way it examined its surroundings. It lifted its head slightly, and its eyes glimmered with a sharp awareness. This was no wild beast. It was something far more advanced. That the creature stumbled slightly, placing one arm against the vessel for support. Its scales near the shoulder were cracked, and a dark fluid seeped out. It was injured, badly. The creature turned its head toward the vet. For a moment, they both froze. The vet felt his breath lock in his chest. It was not fear of being attacked, but the shock of being seen by something not from his world. Then something surprising happened. The creature stepped forward with slow, cautious movements. It raised one arm, not in threat, but as if asking for help. The vet felt a strange pull in his chest. Even though he didn't understand its language or its world, he understood its gesture perfectly. It needed a healer, and he was the only one there. He swallowed hard and took a step forward. He raised his hands slowly to show he meant no harm. The creature watched him closely, studying his actions with careful focus. When he got close enough, he saw that the wound on its shoulder was far deeper than he had realized. Whatever crash it had survived had nearly crushed one side of its body. The plates that covered its arm looked fractured, and every movement caused visible pain. The vet knew treating any unknown creature was dangerous. He didn't know its biology. He didn't know if human medicine could harm it. But walking away wasn't an option he could accept. The creature was suffering. He couldn't ignore that dot. He pointed toward his clinic and then gestured for the creature to follow. It tilted its head slightly, as if trying to understand his intention. Then, with slow steps, it began to walk behind him. The sight of such a tall reptilian being following a human vet across a quiet field felt unreal, but he kept walking. Focusing on the fact that a life needed his help, the creature's breathing grew heavier as they reached the clinic. Its body seemed to weaken from the pain. The vet hurried to unlock the door and guided it inside. Everything about the situation felt impossible, but he stayed calm. He guided the creature to the large examination table normally used for injured farm animals. The creature hesitated, then sat, trying not to crush anything with its weight. The vet gathered tools, bandages, disinfectants, and anything he thought might be useful. He worked slowly, letting the creature see everything he would use. It watched carefully, never taking its glowing eyes off him. When he began cleaning the wound, the creature's body tensed. A deep, rumbling sound escaped its throat, not from anger, but from pain. He murmured calming words, even though he knew it couldn't understand them. But the tone seemed to help. The creature's breathing steadied Dot as he worked. He realized just how complex its biology was. The scales were layered like armor, but beneath them was a soft tissue that reacted differently to pressure and heat. He adjusted his technique, trying to cause as little pain as possible. Hours passed. His hands grew tired, but he didn't stop. The creature's eyes remained on him, watching him with an intensity that made him feel like he was being judged not just as a vet, but as a human being. When the treatment was finally done, the creature let out a slow, deep breath. Its posture eased slightly. It wasn't healed, but it was stable. The vet stepped back, exhausted but relieved. He had no idea what would happen next. He had helped a being from another world. He didn't know if it understood gratitude, fear, or anything familiar to humans. But in that quiet moment, everything between them was calm. He wondered if he had been foolish for helping something so unknown. His mind raced with worries. What if it wasn't safe? What if someone discovered it? What if he had made a mistake? But when he looked into the creature's eyes again, he saw something unexpected. Not threat, not confusion. Something closer to respect. He didn't know it yet, but that simple choice, helping an injured stranger from the sky, would change his life in ways he could not even imagine. The vet stood in his clinic, staring at the injured reptilian queen he had brought inside only an hour ago. The room still felt normal, with its familiar scent of disinfectant and its shelves full of supplies. Yet nothing about this moment felt normal at all. A creature from another world sat quietly on his examination table, watching him with tired but sharp eyes. Its presence made even the shadows seem heavier. Every small sound, the ticking clock, the distant wind, felt louder than usual. He tried to steady his breathing, His hands were already shaking from the first round of treatment, and he knew there was more work ahead. The creature's wounds were not simple scratches. It had cuts that ran deep into its layered scales, burns around the edges of its armor plates, and strange internal swelling he didn't fully understand. He had treated reptiles for years, but nothing prepared him for a patient like this. Still, he gathered everything he thought he might need. Towels, antiseptics, cotton pads, warm water, cooling packs, surgical tools, gloves, and a lamp he pulled close to get a better view. The creature followed his movements with slow turns of its head. It didn't seem afraid. It looked more like it was studying him, as if trying to understand his logic, his intentions, and his strange human ways. He approached gently. The creature's chest rose and fell in slow, measured breaths. It had an air of strength even while injured, the kind of calm that leaders carried. He had seen that kind of presence in rare people, those who didn't need to speak to command attention. And this being had a presence far stronger than any human leader he had ever met. When he placed his hand lightly on the creature's shoulder to check the wound, it flinched, then settled again. The scales were hard like stone on the outside, but warm underneath. The cracked area pulsed unevenly, almost like its body was struggling to repair itself, but failing to keep up. He cleaned around the wound first, using warm water to loosen the dried fluid. The creature made a low sound, deep from its chest, but it didn't pull away. It seemed to understand that he was trying to help Dot as he cleaned the wound. He tried to speak gently, even if the creature didn't know his language. Words sometimes helped calm animals, and perhaps they would help here too. He told it what he was doing before he did it. He explained that he would clean, then disinfect, then try to apply pressure to stop the deeper bleeding. The creature watched his mouth move, listening even if it could not understand. He picked up the disinfectant next, hesitating for a moment. Human medicines worked on human bacteria. They worked on animal bacteria. But he had no idea how an alien body would react. Still, he needed to prevent infection. Leaving the wound untreated would be far worse. He dabbed a small bit of the liquid on the edge of the cracked scale. The creature stiffened, the tendons along its neck tightening, but after a few seconds, it relaxed again. So the medicine didn't burn or poison it. That was a relief. He continued slowly, careful not to push the creature beyond its limits. When he pressed a cloth into the deeper part of the wound, the creature gripped the edge of the table with surprising strength. Its claws dug into the metal surface, leaving faint marks. The rumble in its chest grew louder, almost like a warning, but it stayed still. It allowed him to work. It trusted him enough to stay. Trust from a being like this felt heavy, almost overwhelming. After cleaning, he moved to the next problem, its breathing. The creature's chest rose unevenly, each breath sounding like it dragged through layers of pain. He lifted the lamp higher to check the rib-like plates that covered its torso. Some were bruised. One looked slightly cracked. That explained the shallow, uneven breaths. He didn't know if the ribs protected organs the same way human ribs did, but he assumed they served a similar purpose. He needed to make sure nothing was pressing inward. He placed his hand lightly on the plate. The creature's eyes narrowed, but did not challenge him. When he pressed a little deeper, the creature winced and released another low sound. He whispered calming words again, more out of instinct than logic. He told it he was trying to help. He told it to stay strong, even though it already was stronger than anything he had ever encountered. He checked each plate, noting which ones shifted naturally and which ones were damaged. It took a long time. Sweat gathered around his neck. His hands grew numb, but he kept going. The creature stayed patient the entire time, breathing hard but not resisting. When he finally stepped back, he realized he had been working for hours. The clock on the wall confirmed it. Night had deepened outside, and the world felt quiet, as if holding its breath. The creature followed his movements again, its eyes reflecting the clinic lights in soft blue tones. It didn't look angry or frightened. It looked thoughtful, as if trying to understand why a human would spend so much time on a stranger who fell from the sky. The vet reached for a cooling pack next. The burns across its arm looked raw. He pressed the pack gently against one of the swollen areas. The creature let out a small huff of air, but seemed to appreciate the relief. The coolness spread across its scales, calming the angry red patches. He kept talking quietly, explaining each action. He wasn't sure if the creature picked up meaning from tone, expression, or movement, but something in his calm voice seemed to help. Its body loosened slightly. The tension faded from its shoulders. While treating the burns, he noticed something curious. The scales around the wounds had a faint glow that flickered every time he touched them. At first, he thought it was the reflection of his lamp, but it wasn't. The glow came from the creature itself. It pulsed softly, almost like a heartbeat. He paused, fascinated for a moment, then reminded himself not to stare too long. The creature didn't seem bothered by his curiosity, but he didn't want to make it uncomfortable. He moved on to bandaging. That was difficult because the creature's body structure wasn't like anything he had worked with before. Its limbs were long, with layered plates that shifted like armor pieces. He had to wrap the bandages carefully so they would stay in place without restricting movement. It took a lot of trial and error, and the creature even adjusted its posture at times to help him. It understood he was struggling and made small shifts to guide him. That alone showed intelligence far beyond what he expected. Once the major wounds were treated, he stepped back again to evaluate. The creature looked exhausted, but steadier. Its breaths were still heavy, but no longer sharp with pain. He noticed its eyes drooping, not from weakness, but from the weight of a long night. He felt that weight too. He walked to the sink, washed his hands, and dried them slowly. When he turned back, the creature's gaze was still locked on him. There was something new in its eyes. Gratitude, maybe, or curiosity, or a kind of respect that didn't need words. He approached carefully and gestured for it to rest on the padded area beside the table. The creature watched him, then shifted its weight and lowered itself slowly. It seemed huge when it lay down, filling the room with its presence. Yet its movements were gentle, almost careful not to disturb anything around it. He dimmed the light slightly so the creature wouldn't strain its eyes. It let out a slow, deep breath that seemed to shake the air softly. Even lying down, it held a kind of dignity that felt impossible to describe. He pulled a chair closer and sat, not wanting to leave it alone in such a condition. He wanted to make sure it didn't struggle or injure itself in the night. The creature shifted its gaze to him again, observing him quietly. There was no aggression. There was no fear. Just a steady, meaningful look. The room grew silent except for the soft hum of the fluorescent light and the gentle rhythm of its breathing. The vet leaned back in his chair, feeling the fatigue settle into his bones. His mind ran through everything he had just done. Every moment replayed like a scene in a strange dream. He had treated an alien queen. He had touched its scales, cleaned its wounds, and helped it survive. And the strangest thought of all was that it had allowed him to. It had trusted him. He sat with that thought for a long time. He didn't know why this creature had come to Earth, or how it had ended up crashing in a field near his clinic. He didn't know if it had all eyes searching for it, or if it was alone. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for certain. Whatever he had started tonight was far from over. This was only the beginning of something bigger than he could imagine. And deep down, he sensed that this creature, the queen he had treated so carefully, would not forget what he had done. The vet did not sleep at all that night. His body was tired, but his mind refused to rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the creature again, the tall reptilian queen, lying on the padded floor of his clinic, breathing slowly, her scales rising and falling like waves. The room was dim, quiet, and strangely peaceful. It was hard to believe that only hours before she had fallen from the sky. He watched her carefully from his chair, studying every small movement. Even while resting, she looked powerful, like someone who was never meant to be weak. Her long limbs curled slightly, not in fear, but in exhaustion. The damaged plates along her shoulder glowed faintly with a soft blue light, reminding him that she was something far beyond anything humans had ever known. The night stretched slowly, and sometime before sunrise, the creature stirred. Her eyes opened, glowing faintly in the dim light. She lifted her head, scanning her surroundings as if checking whether she was safe. When her gaze landed on the vet, she did not tense like an animal waking near a stranger. Instead, she watched him calmly, almost knowingly. He sat up straighter when he saw she was awake. He spoke gently, explaining that she had been injured and that he had done his best to help. She didn't understand the words, but she understood his tone. Her eyes softened slightly. She pushed her hand against the floor and tried to sit up. He quickly held out his hand to stop her, gently motioning for her to rest. She hesitated, then lowered herself slowly again. She trusted him, and that trust felt heavier than anything he had ever carried. The sky outside grew lighter, bringing a soft gray glow through the window. Morning birds began to chirp. The world outside didn't know that something extraordinary was lying inside an old clinic. To everyone else, it was just another normal morning. The vet stood and prepared a bowl of warm water and a clean cloth. When he returned, the creature watched every move with sharp attention. He kneeled beside her and gently dabbed the cloth around the bandaged areas. Her breathing tightened at first, but she didn't pull away. She allowed him to work, and it made him feel strangely proud. While he cleaned, he noticed something new. Her scales near the wound had started to shift slightly, merging and adjusting in a way that looked like healing. It was far quicker than any natural reptile he had treated. Her body seemed to have its own repair system, something he didn't fully understand. He worked slowly, worried he might interfere with her natural healing. The creature lifted her head again and emitted a soft sound, almost like a low vibration. It wasn't threatening. It reminded him of someone trying to say something, but not having the right words. He looked into her eyes and realized she was trying to communicate. He had treated countless animals in his life, but this was different. Animals reacted to pain, comfort, or danger. They didn't try to share information. Yet this creature looked at him with an intention behind her gaze, as if she wanted him to understand something important. He stepped back and gave her space. The creature slowly raised her hand and tapped her chest, right over the area where her armor looked more polished and complex. Then she made a slow, sweeping gesture upward, pointing toward the ceiling. The vet blinked. He understood the gesture, even though it came from a being who didn't speak his language. She was telling him she wasn't from here. He nodded slowly to show he understood. The creature held his gaze for a moment, then tapped her chest again, this time tapping two specific scales that looked slightly different from the rest. The scales glowed faintly when she touched them. He realized those markings were not natural patterns. They were symbols, like a badge or crest. She was not just any visitor from the sky. She was someone important. As the signs connected in his mind, he felt a small shock move through him. She was royalty, or something close to it. When that realization settled, the creature watched him as if waiting to see whether he understood the weight of what she had shown him. He gave a slow, respectful nod. She relaxed slightly, perhaps relieved that she didn't need to hide her identity in a place so unfamiliar. She then closed her eyes for a moment and placed one hand on the wounds he had treated. The plates around the injuries separated slightly, revealing a deeper layer underneath. Her breathing changed, becoming heavier. It seemed like she was trying to show him something risky, something private to her kind. He leaned closer, careful not to touch without permission. She tapped the soft tissue inside the wound and made another low vibration. It took him a second to understand what she meant. Her body was trying to heal, but something was blocking the process. The crash had done more than break her armor. Something inside was damaged too. He frowned and examined the area more closely. He needed to find a way to help her without knowing her biology. It felt almost impossible. Yet she looked at him with expectation, as if believing he could help. Her trust made him feel responsible in a way he had never felt before. He prepared a small scanner, something he usually used for larger animals to detect fractures or internal swelling. He wasn't sure if it would work on an alien being, but he had no other tools. He held the device near her chest. When it buzzed and showed a broken pattern, the creature tensed again, but did not resist. The vet studied the screen. The reading was messy, but he could see enough. There was a foreign object lodged deep inside her body. It looked sharp, like a piece of the vessel she had crashed in. Her body was trying to push it out, but it was stuck too deep. If he did nothing, her healing system might fail. He looked up at her with worry. The creature's eyes met his. She already knew something was wrong. She tapped her chest again, slower this time, and made a soft, rumbling sound. It wasn't a cry. It was more like a patient saying, "Do what you must." He took a deep breath. Even on humans, this would be a delicate procedure, and here he was trying it on a being from another world. But he had no choice. She trusted him, and he couldn't let her down. He prepared a small surgical kit. His hands were trembling, and he tried to steady them. He moved slowly, keeping his motions calm so she wouldn't panic. She lay still, watching every step with eyes full of strength. He disinfected the area gently, then placed his hand near her wound to show he was beginning. She nodded, or at least the closest movement to a nod her body allowed. That small gesture gave him courage. With slow, careful movements, he worked. The creature's breathing tightened. Her claws dug lightly into the padded floor. The vet whispered calm words, knowing she didn't understand the language, but hoping she understood the intent. Minutes passed like hours. Sweat ran down his forehead. He finally saw the foreign shard, sharp and metallic, lodged deep inside. The creature growled softly in pain, but stayed still, trusting him completely. He gripped the shard with small forceps and pulled slowly. The creature gasped, her body shuddering. The moment the shard slid free, a wave of glowing energy moved across her scales. The room filled with a faint hum, and for a moment, the vet stepped back in shock. Her body glowed brighter, like her healing system had been waiting for this moment to activate fully. Her breathing became easier. Her posture loosened. The tension in her muscles slowly faded. The shard of alien metal lay in his hand cold, sharp, and unlike anything he had ever touched. He set it aside gently. The creature looked at him. Her eyes filled with something deeper now. Respect, relief, gratitude. She placed her hand near her chest again, tapping lightly over the wound. Then she touched her forehead and lowered her head slightly, not in weakness, but in a gesture that resembled a bow. The vet froze. This creature, this queen, was thanking him. He felt his throat tighten. He had no words, yet somehow the silence between them said everything. He didn't know how long she would stay in his clinic. He didn't know if others of her kind were searching for her. He didn't know what dangers might come next. But one thing became clear to him in that moment. She was no longer just a wounded stranger from the sky. She was someone who saw him not as a random human, but as someone who mattered, and the bond between them had grown stronger than either of them expected. The sun had already climbed high, by the time the vet stepped out of the clinic the next morning. His eyes were tired, his shirt wrinkled, and his hair messy, but his mind was focused on only one thing, the creature resting inside. The queen was healing slowly, but she was still far from safe. The night had been long and strange, yet he felt strangely protective over her now, like it was his responsibility to keep her safe no matter what happened. He stretched his back and looked around. In the daylight, everything looked so normal. Cars passed on the distant road. Birds flew overhead. Nothing about the world hinted that an alien being lay injured inside the small clinic. But his sense of calm didn't last long. Something felt off. There was a strange uneasiness in the air, like trouble was already on its way. His phone buzzed in his pocket. When he pulled it out, he saw 3 missed calls from a neighbor who rarely contacted him. Then a new message arrived. It said there were people walking around the fields behind the hill, strangers no one had seen before. They were wearing dark clothing and carrying some kind of equipment. They claimed to be researchers studying wildlife, but the neighbor didn't believe them. They were too serious, too organized, too careful. The vet's heart sank. He knew immediately why they were there. That someone had seen the lights from the crash the previous night. Someone had reported it. Word had spread faster than he expected. And now a group, whoever they were, was looking for whatever fell. He rushed back into the clinic, closing the door behind him. The creature lifted her head when she saw him enter, sensing the shift in his mood. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if she could read the tension on his face. She made a soft vibration in her chest, a question without words. He moved closer and spoke calmly, even though he felt anything but calm. He told her they were in danger. He told her that people were coming, people who would not understand her, people who wouldn't see her as a being who needed help, but as something unknown, and unknown things scared humans. Unknown things made them act without thinking. She listened carefully, her gaze sharp, her breathing growing heavier. She didn't understand his words, but she understood his tone. She understood danger. Her claws pressed lightly into the floor, and her posture straightened slightly, showing the instinct of a leader ready to face a threat. But the vet didn't want her to fight. She was still hurt. She needed time, not conflict. He gently touched her arm and shook his head. She watched him, studying the gesture. Then she lowered her hand again, accepting his message. He pointed toward the back room, where he kept storage boxes and old equipment. A small trapdoor led to a low underground space. Originally built to store medicines during storms, it wasn't comfortable. But it was hidden. The creature followed his gesture, understanding enough to rise slowly. She winced when she moved, but her determination was stronger than her pain. He helped her stand, placing his hand under her arm for support. Her weight was heavier than any animal he had ever helped, but she moved carefully so she wouldn't injure him. Together, they made their way to the back. He opened the trapdoor, revealing the dim space below. It wasn't deep, but it was enough to hide her from anyone searching the building. She looked at it, then back at him, her eyes full of questions. He nodded again, telling her this was the safest place for now. She hesitated, not out of fear, but out of concern. She didn't want to be trapped. She didn't want to be powerless. But she also trusted him, and that trust pushed her forward. She lowered herself into the space with quiet strength, folding her limbs carefully so she wouldn't hit the walls. He placed a thick blanket on the ground to soften the surface. She rested on it, keeping her gaze on him even as he prepared to close the trapdoor. The last thing he saw before the door lowered was her eyes, bright, intelligent, and full of silent understanding. He covered the trapdoor with boxes, old files, and a few storage items to make it look untouched. Then he took a deep breath and walked back to the front of the clinic. Minutes later, footsteps approached from outside. Yvette stepped outside, pretending everything was normal. 3 people in dark jackets stood near the entrance. They had no badges, no friendly smiles, no casual attitude. One of them asked if he had seen or heard anything unusual last night. They spoke with polite voices, but their eyes scanned every corner of the property, searching for clues. The vet kept his tone steady as he answered. He told them he heard a loud boom, but he thought it was distant thunder. He pretended he didn't know anything more. Inside, his heart hammered against his ribs. Every second felt too long, too dangerous. One of the strangers asked if they could look around. The vet forced a smile and said they could stay outside, but could not enter the clinic without permission. The stranger's expression tightened for a moment. It was clear they didn't like being told no. But they also knew they couldn't force their way in without causing trouble. Instead, they circled the building, searching the ground, the trees, the bush. They looked for burn marks, metal fragments, anything that might prove something had landed nearby. One of them stared at the clinic's back window for too long, making the vet's stomach twist with fear. He stayed calm on the outside, but inside, he kept imagining the worst. What if they found the trapdoor? What if they tried to search inside? What if the creature made a sound? After almost an hour, the strangers returned to the front. They thanked him with stiff smiles and left without giving him their names. He watched their vehicle drive away, dust rising behind it. Only when it disappeared completely did he let out the breath he had been holding. He rushed to the back and quietly removed the items covering the trapdoor. When he opened it, the creature looked up at him immediately. Her eyes were alert, ready to defend herself if she had to. But when she saw him, her shoulders relaxed. He motioned for her to come up. She climbed out slowly, her movements still heavy with pain. But this time, there was something else in her gaze worry for him. She had seen the fear in his eyes. She had sensed the danger outside, and she understood that he had protected her, even though it meant putting himself at risk. The vet touched her arm gently. She leaned slightly toward him, a quiet sign of connection. He knew this was just the beginning. The strangers would not give up easily. They would come back with better equipment, deeper questions, and more pressure. And if they found her, they would take her away. They would treat her like something to study, not someone who needed understanding. She belonged somewhere far away, not in a cold laboratory, not in a cage, but with her own people. He looked at her and spoke in a soft but firm voice, even though she didn't know the language. He told her that she needed to leave soon, that staying here was no longer safe, that he would do whatever it took to help her reach the clearing where her beacon had landed. She listened, her chest rising with slow breaths. Then she placed her hand on his shoulder, a gesture that felt almost like reassurance. She wasn't afraid. She trusted him enough to follow his lead. The vet spent the rest of the day preparing. He packed food, water, tools, blankets, anything that could help her survive the journey. The forest clearing wasn't far, but she was injured, and danger was closing in. He had to be ready. When the sun began to set, painting the sky with soft orange colors, he looked at her and nodded. She nodded back, ready to go. And as they stepped into the fading light together, the vet realized something powerful. He wasn't just helping a creature anymore. He was helping someone who believed in him, someone who trusted him with her life, and he would not let that trust break. He stood at the edge of the clearing long after the light vanished from the sky. The forest around him looked normal again, quiet and dark, as if nothing unusual had happened there. But his heartbeat refused to settle. His hands were still shaking. He kept staring at the empty space where the strange queen had disappeared, almost expecting her to return. Part of him still could not believe that the moment had actually happened. Another part of him felt strangely calm, as if something deep inside understood that his life had just changed forever. He slowly walked back toward his old truck, feeling the cool wind brush his face. The air smelled of damp leaves and soil. Everything seemed sharper than before, like his senses had turned up without him realizing it. Even the distant chirping of insects sounded clearer. Yet his mind kept going back to the final moments he had shared with the alien queen. He replayed it again and again, trying to understand what she had given him. He touched the spot on his chest where the strange glowing mark had formed. The skin there felt warm even now, like it held a quiet pulse of its own. When he finally reached his clinic, the lights from inside spilled onto the driveway. His assistant had left hours ago, leaving the space silent. He locked the door again behind him, even though he knew no one was around. After everything that had happened, the world felt too unpredictable to leave anything open. He set his coat on a hook and moved toward the examination room, trying to get back to normal, but normal no longer felt like something real. It was only an idea. As he washed his hands and cleaned the counters, he noticed something unusual. His hands didn't tremble. They felt steadier than ever. His thoughts flowed smoothly, without the usual stress that crept in after a long day. He paused for a moment, staring at his reflection in the small metal sink. He didn't look different. He didn't glow. He didn't appear stronger. Yet he felt changed in a quiet way, like something inside him had shifted. Maybe it was just emotion. Maybe it was adrenaline. Or maybe it was something else. He wasn't ready to decide. The next morning came with soft sunlight shining through the old clinic windows. He woke tired, but strangely alert. His body felt rested even though he had barely slept. He brushed it off and opened the clinic as usual. Soon enough, a man from a nearby farm rushed in with a small injured dog. The dog had been hit by a passing cart and was struggling to breathe. Normally, injuries like that took time, careful checking, slow steps. But today, as soon as he touched the animal, he felt something surprising. It was almost like he could sense where the injury was hidden, like his hands instinctively knew where to press lightly and where to avoid. He didn't understand it, but he followed the feeling. By afternoon, the dog was already recovering better than expected. The owner kept thanking him again and again, shocked by how fast the animal improved. He didn't know what to say. He knew he had treated animals his whole life, but this was different. Everything had felt natural, as if his hands were guided by a calm instinct that wasn't there before. He remembered the queen's glowing gift and felt a quiet shiver run down his spine. Over the next few days, more animals came in with all kinds of problems. A horse with a deep cut, a reptile with a breathing issue, a goat with a strange fever. And every time he touched them, the same strange feeling returned. He could sense their pain, understand their condition faster, and act with a confidence that surprised even him. Word spread through the small town silently. People started whispering that he had become a miracle worker. Some said he had always been gifted. Others said he must have learned new techniques. No one imagined the truth, and he didn't dare tell anyone. He didn't want visitors from outside. He didn't want attention from authorities. He didn't want research groups thinking he had something rare that they wanted to take. The memory of the group that had tried to capture the queen still haunted him. It reminded him that humans did not always act with kindness. Sometimes curiosity turned dangerous. Sometimes power turned cruel. He had protected the queen from that world, and now he needed to protect himself too. One evening, after a long day, he sat alone on the clinic steps. The sun dipped behind the hills, leaving orange light across the sky. He placed a hand over the warm marking on his chest. It didn't glow anymore, but it still held a quiet energy that he could feel under his skin. He thought about the queen and the moment she had offered him the gift. She hadn't spoken words, he understood, but her expression and gestures said more than speech could. She wanted to repay him. She wanted him to live with the same care he had shown her. He wondered where she was now. Was she safe with her own people? Did she remember him? Did her species often repay kindness like this? Or was he the first human they had trusted? He would probably never know. The only thing he knew for sure was that his simple life as a rural vet had been touched by something far beyond his world. Days turned into weeks, and his clinic became busier. Farmers traveled from distant villages, telling others about the quiet doctor who saved animals that looked beyond saving. He didn't turn anyone away. He didn't boast. He didn't pretend to have magic. He simply did what he always did, letting the new instinct guide him gently. When people thanked him, he smiled politely and said he was just doing his job. Deep inside, he knew the truth was more complicated. The gift the Queen gave him wasn't something he asked for. It was something she chose to give, trusting him with something precious. Sometimes, late at night, he wondered what the gift truly was. Was it a technology? A biological boost? A symbol of trust? Or something deeper that human science couldn't understand? But no matter how he thought about it, one thing stayed constant. It changed him not just in ability, but in outlook. He no longer felt like an ordinary vet. He felt like someone who had been seen by another world, someone whose kindness had been recognized. One night, as rain fell softly outside and the clinic lights glowed warmly, a small group of farmers gathered in the waiting area. They were talking about how the world was changing fast, how machines were taking over fields, how life felt uncertain. He listened quietly while cleaning instruments, and he realized something. The Queen didn't repay him with riches or fame. She repaid him with purpose. She gave him a way to help the living beings around him in a deeper, more meaningful way. She gave him a chance to become something better without changing who he was. He looked around his small clinic, the worn-out tables, the old lamps, the smell of medicine, and he felt gratitude. This place had been his world for years, and now it felt bigger. The animals he treated weren't just patients anymore. They were connections to something larger than he had ever imagined. Some nights he still returned to the forest clearing. He stood there in silence, watching the trees sway in the wind, hoping to see a faint glow in the sky. He never saw her again, but the quiet of the forest always reminded him of that night. It reminded him that kindness sometimes reached farther than expected, across species, across planets, across fear. He knew one thing for sure. He had helped the Queen because it was the right thing to do. She repaid him because she believed the same. And even though their worlds were different, their choices created a bridge no one else knew about. A bridge made not of technology or power, but of trust. He placed a hand over the warm mark on his chest again and smiled softly. His life had changed, but in the best possible way. He didn't need anyone to believe his story. He didn't need proof. The healing he offered every day was proof enough for him. And somewhere in the vast sky above, he hoped the Queen knew that her gift was still living through every life he saved.